Hello everyone, welcome to Coffee Cup Enlightenment. Today I'm going to talk about what is self-inquiry, and along with this question, I also have another series of questions that are common, that are associated with that sort of go along with the question of what is self-inquiry. And first, it needs to be noted that self-inquiry it's probably can be described in two ways. The first way is it's actually a natural process that's happening with everyone. It pretty much, in its natural form, this is you, which is the observer, which is unrealized at the start when you come into this world. And naturally, concepts come into your life. And they just, there's almost like an assumption into their reality, and in that assumption that is unquestioned, they become identified with. And naturally, this happens for different people, different identifications of concepts become identified with. And this is obviously greatly due to your conditioning and your environment, which country you're in, and all the cultural beliefs that exist in that, and also obviously the current level of intensity of all these conditionings and cultural um, sort of lifestyles that are in place. So it naturally happens. We take on certain thoughts, and because this part of ourself isn't realized yet, this observer, it's inevitably going to happen that the concept is, because it's not questioned or focused on uh, in such an assumptive manner, that it becomes identified with, and then it becomes part of your identity. And then it naturally happens, maybe another concept comes and it adds to that layer, and still this part underneath isn't realized as the one that's looking at the concepts. It's just focusing on the concepts, and it thinks they are itself, so they become part of your identity. And then say another one comes on board, and you identify with that, and then naturally it happens also. Some concepts, without you even knowing it, in a conscious manner, they become uh, faced up with opposing concepts, where this concept can no longer sustain itself. So naturally it just comes out. And this is also partakes to the part that also the consciousness is seeing this to some degree. Even though you're not fully aware of yourself as this consciousness, this observer, there must be some knowingness that's able to see the falseness of one particular concept, and then have another concept take its place, and this concept hasn't been realized yet. And eventually it will be the day where this concept will also be realized as just a concept. So maybe this one might hang around for a few years, and then another concept comes, and now this concept doesn't seem to match with that concept. This one becomes shaky and unstable, and that's thrown out of the picture, and now a new concept takes its place. And this is evidence of what's sort of described here, is why the things that made you cry when you're younger now might make you laugh. So these old concepts here might have represented particular judgments that were identified with, that then birthed corresponding emotions of tears, and then eventually, just naturally, it occurs through your life experiences. Um, some of these concepts are replaced, and these can no longer be identified with, and in so to it, you can no longer have the same tears anymore that was once held at a younger age. And so that's sort of like the natural process of self-inquiry. It's going on naturally, but it's not really conscious. And what these videos are about is the conscious um, activation or use, or sort of yeah, to some extent using these um, understandings of what self-inquiry is, the natural process that's already happening, to see if we can put it to like a deliberate use in our life, and see if it actually does something, and causes an effect in the way we interact in the world. And I've got some other questions here as well. What is the purpose of then conscious self-inquiry? So conscious self-inquiry is basically once we understand this process of what's going on, how we become identified with certain concepts, and then some concepts drop away and new ones replace it. How can we use this understanding in day-to-day life in a practical way, and in essence lessen these identifications to the point where this is only realized as just yourself as this consciousness is only realized, and how does this affect your perception of reality and the way you interact with the world. So the effects of the when you are identified with concepts is that you're not actually looking at the world as sort of described in previous videos. You're actually looking at the concepts that have been identified with, and it's through the filter of these concepts that your experience of the world comes. And this is subject to unlimited distortion. The reason why I use the word distortion is because one person can have one set of identifications and a different person can have another set of identifications, and there's no limit to it. Even if they're positive flavored identifications or negative flavored identifications, they still are identifications, and the experience of reality needs none of these. Reality exists prior to all identifications imposed on it, or looking at the world through them, through these identifications. So the effects of the non-mind identified state is seeing the world as it is. The world is what it is, which is a very common statement. The world exists prior. In its pure reality, the world is what it is, and to the great extent, you don't need any sort of judgments imposed on it. But really, it's not you making the judgments. It's because we have a mind, and we think we are the mind, and we think it's us making the judgments. It's not. A lot of these videos is really getting to the absolute core of what's actually going on in that. There's a lot of sort of awareness, sort of education out there where it says, and that's why I got all these sort of children's books here, is to sort of describe it as well. Where it's said that if we just stop judging, then our life will be better, or if we just let go, our life will be better and easier. If we forgive, is a very common and ancient one. Our life will be much better and easier, and it's more beneficial for us. And these are all true, but what I like to sort of note in these videos is that the one that doesn't forgive, that's the conceptual self. And the conceptual self is constructed out of mind, out of judgments. And if you didn't have this mind in your experience, you wouldn't also have the judgments. And if you didn't have the judgments, there would be no situations created that are considered as wrong or unforgivable. So it is through the process of having a mind, imposing these judgments out onto the world, identifying with the mind as us, and then through this triangle of experience, it comes back and hits us in the face that I need to forgive. And this is, there's nothing wrong with using this method to forgive, because it can undo these layers of identifications. But I just like to sort of describe it in a different way, that there's nothing really you need to do. All these videos, and they try to improve each time they're made, is always trying to direct to the point that there's nothing you have to do. All you need to do is just see. Throughout these entire series of videos, there's only one directive given here, and it's not actually a doing, because you already are the seer, the observer. Is just be that you already are. And so it's really, this is considered the most fastest, directest way to undoing identifications. Is always directing it back to the seer, to the observer, which is always there in the background, which is your essence, which is your nature. Rather than tell you, all right, here's a negative belief, a thought which you've become identified with. Now let's replace it with a positive one. And this is like early stages of self-awareness. This is something that I used to do for a few years, and it was very beneficial to me to begin to understand the nature of thoughts and how they affect my reality. I was able to swap the negative beliefs with the positive beliefs, and now I had a different experience. But what I'm trying to say in these videos is that you don't even need the positive belief, because this on its own, it's already peaceful. And it's only when you get rid of this this game of positive and negative identifications, when they start to remove themselves from your identification, then you get a self-evident natural experience, that you already are peace, you already are enlightenment, and there's nothing you have to do to get it, because you already are it. And so through our day-to-day life's experiences, we can use and that's where I'm going to sort of talk about a bit about these children's books. We can use self-inquiry to address the common assumptions in our life, and this is what I've been doing for many years, and it's slowly and gradually, and sometimes it's done it in a big manner where it's a big shift has happened in identifications, has been removed. But every time I felt a nudge, I attempted to get to this part of myself, the observer, and I investigated. And say, if we use an example here, I feel sad, or sorry, I feel scared. What else is there? I feel angry. So these are just kids, like a kid's book. I feel happy. I feel sad, and there's lots of other emotional states here as well. But the common denominator in all this is the letter I, and this is also what I sort of just talked about before in this video. Is the word I is associated with identification. So I feel angry. I would like to change that by just opening up the notion that it's not you that feels angry. It's this conceptual self. There's a self-identity that's constructed out of thoughts and ideas, and the emotions are generated through that filter of these thoughts and ideas. And this here has nothing to do with anger whatsoever. And this is the power of what I'm talking about right here. This is the absolute nuts and bolts. There's much power in what's been said here. It's because if you can sort of get an experience of what this feels like inside yourself to be this, and you use this in practical day-to-day living situations, and you see that I feel angry can be turned around and said, like in Buddhist tradition, they say, don't say I feel angry, say I can feel anger within me, or something of that matter, where you're not sort of identifying with it as your identity, which is this, but you're recognizing that the experience is coming into your field of perception, and you can feel it, but it's not of you. You can it's in your field that you can sense and see and feel, but it's not of you. And it's when you experience the absence of it, where it no longer comes predominantly anymore, or maybe in some cases totally, some of these states dissolve completely, then you realize the truth that it isn't of you at all. And but for most people, and for myself, it's a gradual process. So I feel angry. If you observe the anger, which is this emotional state, it's a bit tricky to do this now because it's also, there's a judgment associated with it, and there's also the world. So basically, the judgment is projected out to the world. Let's just say this is the world. And the judgment, this is the judgment from the mind. It's projected onto the world. And when you identify with that judgment, it births an emotion of anger. And that's... So the anger is not born from the world. It doesn't come from what people say, what people don't say, what people do, what people don't do, what happens or what doesn't happen. It comes from your identification with that thought, with that judgment. And when your consciousness is able to see that, it's the judgment that birthed this emotion, it didn't come from the world, no matter what happened. And you're able to see that the world is neutral, and also the judgment is neutral, and also this emotion is neutral. And in this field of experience of seeing the world, the judgment, the emotion created from your identification with it, through seeing that you're identified with the judgment, you get to realize yourself as this, which is the observer more. And it grows within you. Every unfolding of a witnessed emotion, of seeing its point of origin, of where it really came from, rather than saying, let's see what one of these books tells us where this emotion came from. I feel angry when I can't have something. And actually, I don't know if that might be a bit tricky because it's associated with possessions. I don't know what's this. I don't really want to use much of these examples and get much into the content, but I'll rather just sort of stick to the basics of, if you could, rather than get into the content of it, which can be a bit distracting. I'll rather just stick to the absolute essence, and never mind because the content's never ending. It's always got endless justifications that keep this emotion becoming perceived as coming from the world, rather than recognized as coming from your identification with this judgment, which comes from the mind. If you knew you weren't the mind, no judgments could be imposed onto the world. And if there's no judgments imposed onto the world, no corresponding emotions could be experienced. And then what's left is to look at the world as it is. So the whole aspect of this entire video is to see that you are not this, which is the mind. The mind's within us. It's changed throughout many years, and it's developed as it's become more identified with over the years. And you can see this just in the in your own personal experience, from being young to growing into adolescence. It's the mind becomes more identified with, and it develops more. And the more it develops, the more it becomes identified with. And the more it develops, the more chances there are for judgments to be projected onto the world. And when they're projected onto the world and you focus on them judgments, that you're the one doing it, and you can't see it's just a judgment, then you also can't see the neutrality of the world. And but in the end, this whole process of our identification with mind, and it births all these concepts, and it also births this illusionary I, feeling that I am all this. Eventually it presents itself to be exposed to the jury of your consciousness. And that's really what this video is about, is bringing all of this to the jury. If it is true, let's test it to see if it is true. Sometimes it becomes revealed that your juryhood of consciousness sees the falseness of a concept, because another concept is equally of value. And then the validity of concepts becomes exposed as insignificant. And as this happens, your consciousness awakens more to itself, and you realize yourself more as this rather than what it can see. And the more and more this happens, it becomes like a snowball effect, where concepts are no longer taken seriously anymore. And when that happens, the mind, instead of being automatically identified with and assumed to be who you are, and it's just and the more your identification is with the mind, the more it projects. So it's like a mirror effect. The more you don't know yourself as this, the more the mind comes into play, and the more projections it makes, and the more easy you are to identify with its projections, and the less you are able to see the emotion as coming from your identification. Because if you did know yourself as this, there would be no identification. So it's natural and normal that, of course, you're not going to know where this emotion came from. And that's what self-inquiry is trying to do. It's trying to activate this. Do a little simple investigation for yourself and see, where did this emotion really come from? Was it really from the world? Or was it from the mind making a judgment? And there's an assumption going on that that's true and real. And it may be true to some extent, but it's how much you identify with it which makes the emotion. There's nothing wrong with using judgments in your everyday today living. We don't have to, have a lobotomy and become mindless drones. There's nothing. Just because we have a mind, it doesn't mean we have to mistake ourselves as the mind. And the mind can exist within us. It can be highly developed, but there's no need for us to confuse ourselves as the mind. And your experience and quality of life changes is when you experience yourself as this, which is the observer. I am not the mind, I am the observer of the mind. I am the one that sees the mind, and I am the one that sees also when I become confused as the mind. I am the one that sees the emotions and how they are generated when I follow a concept. I am that. The one that knows and sees and observes, and it's silent, it doesn't make any judgments, it just sees. It's still, and it's vast. And the reason why it's vast is because it doesn't have any concepts to it. So there's no limitations and no judgments which can categorize it, and it's infinite. And that's why that's one of the major aspects and the attributes of what's considered as the truth of who you are. You're infinite and vast, and it's only through our identification as ourselves as this, I am this, I am that, and it's limiting. But then eventually you see that I am not that. I can see where this emotion came from. I feel scared. I can see where this emotion, I feel angry, came from. And all the rest of them. All these eventually see that I am not this, and eventually some of these permanently come out of your experience. And sometimes they might just come up a little bit, and they're very quickly witnessed and seen as where they actually come from. These don't actually come from the world, although they did come from this box. They came from your identification with mind, and they should come from, these things should be birthed, because they're a substitute in this game of recognizing who we are, and that's the only purpose of what we're here for. We're here to discover ourselves as this. What a beautiful game, how perfectly designed that something substitutes. Until you know yourself as this, let's just give yourself as this. And the nudging effect caused from believing yourself to be this eventually brings you to discovery of this. It's an absolute precision perfect game. And in the nanosecond that you identify yourself as being this, a perfectly corresponding emotion is born. The more you identify yourself as being this, a stronger emotion is born. And it's a perfect correspondence to this. Whatever particular flavour it is, it'll match it. If it's this particular flavour, I am scared, it'll match it, and this will have the exact matching. Everything's an absolute mirror. The more you identify with each particular flavour, the stronger the feeling of the emotion, and the undoing of this whole process relies just in this, which is already who you are. If just to see, not to suppress, not to say, this is bad, this is good. I want to put away this, I want to drop this. Nothing wrong with sometimes using these tools, dropping, forgiving, allowing, and that. But ultimately, there's nothing really you need to do. This is just a different aspect, a different direction you can go. There's nothing wrong with using the other directions of dropping, forgiving, allowing, and all that. But another way of doing it as well, which is what gradually over the years I've been inclined to doing, is just looking. And when you look at, say, I feel scared, and you just look at it with no judgments, it can actually intensify yourself as this, and the feeling of yourself as this. And as this begins to intensify and it becomes, this gets used as a mirror, because you're looking at that to such a point that you can see, I am not that, I am looking at that. And then it turns into like a mirror to reveal yourself as this even more. So, and then these become turned into gifts. Before they just becomes identified with, and they create nudges, and it distorts your perception of reality. But now you can use this emotion, look at it, and it might feel a bit shaky at the start, and then you keep looking at it, and then all of a sudden this calmness starts to come. And that's because this part of your essence is becoming realized, because you're staring at it for long enough. Even if you just stared at it for about 7 seconds or something, an emotion, you'll start to feel the effects of it. Stare at it for about 15 seconds, the emotion, without trying to do anything to it, just looking at it. No judgments, no wanting it to go, no wanting it to stay. Actually, I shouldn't. I do want to mention also a bit of a hack. Later on, as these emotions become seen, and this becomes strengthened in your identity, and they dissolve. One of a bit of a hack I've got is actually, when they do come into your experience, and this is becoming predominantly realized, is actually say, if there is some doing, you can actually do say to the emotion to stay as long as you want. Have a cup of coffee, come down, sit with me, tell me your concerns. And in that light, it brings about even more realization that I am not this, that I am the observer of this. If you welcome it, if you say stay as long as you want, which means there's no more of this mind bringing in resistance to this, then it collapses much more quickly, and it brings about more realization of yourself as this. So that's how emotions in your day-to-day practical living can be used to bring about this and lessen this. And the goal isn't really about lessening this, it's really about the ultimate goal is seeing reality. And not only in the outside world, which is also part of yourself, but also this. That's our only purpose, what we're here for. It's like it's a training ground, and you only have one purpose, is to get yourself as this, to realize it. And then what's next is who knows what's next. But that's our training ground here. And the funny thing is also how this cycle of identification keeps itself in place, is that the reason why this needs to be silent, just see, in a still state of, if you want to call it, welcomeness and invitingness. Come and stay as long as you want. You can say to the fear, you can stay there. Come, let me make you a coffee. Put your feet up. Tell me your concerns, and then as you do this, then you gather that realization you are not it. But then the mind can make a projection. So while this emotion, which was generated from identification from mind, the mind then comes in again, and it makes a resistance to it. And that's what comes from suppression. The reason why the suppression state is just it's an extended form of identification, is because now you're identifying yourself with the resistor to this emotion, which is mind. So you're still identifying with the mind. And then this just causes a cycle. So the emotion was born from identification with the mind's judgment, and that's it there. Now we're trying to look at it, and now the mind's projecting onto it judgments about technically what it caused, but it didn't really cause it. It caused because you identified with it in the first place. So the mind's innocent, but even this projection, if the mind does that onto the emotion while you're trying to look at it, then you look at that. Look at that judgment as well. See that I'm not that judgment about the emotion. And the whole, what I'm talking about here, this is a breaking up of all the things we become identified with. This represents all of that, different states. But you can actually, the most fastest way is to see that I am not all that. The mind, everything that who you think you are, all its judgments, all the mind, if you can witness all of that, and the whole lot can go, that's the most fastest way to it. And sometimes it happens for some people that they don't need to go through individual processes, maybe in the way I'm doing it, where I'm just looking at one aspect at a time with the mind as it arises in my day-to-day living. It just naturally happens. Bang, the whole lot gets seen and exposed. It's not that common though. It's very rare for that to happen. But yeah, thanks for watching, and if you have any comments or questions, please post them on the bottom, and yeah, maybe I can make another video out of it. Thank you.